I'd been on a lifetime of the Paxils, the Zolofts, the Selexas, the SSRIs, thinking that's what I needed to get through all of this, and was able to go off anything and everything with the help of the balanced diet and the nutrition that helped feed my microbiome that wasn't really
Wow.
understood back then.
As a vegan, do you ever feel like you're living in a parallel universe, aware of things that many others don't even seem to notice, let alone acknowledge? I'm Chrissy Benson, host of the Vegan Posse podcast. We talk with vegans from around the globe who, like you, are living lives of integrity and compassion with an eye toward justice. Through their personal stories, you'll come to see that you're not an outlier. In fact, you're part of an entire posse of individuals who aren't just keeping the peace, they're creating it through their food choices and beyond. You won't be saddling up, but you're in for the ride of your life. Welcome to the Vegan Posse. Hey Posse, I'm your host, Chrissy Benson. Today, I am delighted to introduce Nan Simonsen, who is a health coach and author of the book Aging Powerfully. We tend to think of eating disorders like anorexia and bulimia as something that teenagers and young women wrestle with and sort of naturally outgrow, but that's not always the case. Shrouded by feelings of abandonment, inferiority, and self-loathing throughout adolescence, Nan developed an eating disorder that would stay with her well into adulthood, and she carried that secret for decades. In this conversation, Nan speaks honestly and vulnerably about her own challenges and how she overcame them in a way that I found truly inspiring and empowering, and I think you will too. So enjoy this conversation with Nan Simonsen. You ready for the ride of your life?
Absolutely.
Excellent. No hesitation. I love that. So you currently live in California. Is that where you're from? And is that where you grew up?
Yes, actually, I'm about an hour and a half from where I grew up. And I've been in this area except for 1 year out of state. I've been generally around the LA area. My entire life.
Right. So a true California girl.
Yes.
So tell me about, your food history. Like, how did you eat growing up and what were your family's, attitudes about health and eating?
Okay. Well, I'm going to reference my book, Aging Powerfully.
Please, yes.
Because I'm a certified health and lifestyle coach. I work with a lifestyle medical practice as I have for nearly 6 years. And the founding doctor of that practice, Dr. Wayne Dysinger, is one of the founding members and past presidents of the College of Lifestyle Medicine. So I'm married to everything about lifestyle medicine that way. Or I have been for these 6 years. And when I wrote Aging Powerfully, I've been with them as a coach, going on 3 years. And it was so clear that this was the holy grail of health, that with the precepts of lifestyle medicine, those pillars of lifestyle medicine, and we can get to that later, people could prevent disease. That was harder to measure, but what we could very easily measure was those who came in sick, and the chronic diseases were eating them away, or at least eating their lives away. They spent so much time trying to just survive. And then some with intractable illnesses, things that, well, one man ready to have a leg amputated, and all of that abated and then reversed. And not everything, but a lot of things reversed with lifestyle as medicine. So in my book, I have a portion, it's about a quarter of the book maybe, that deals with that question you just asked. And that is a bit of my history. And then the rest takes that word powerfully as an acronym to describe 10 lifestyle modalities that have been shown to give us a longer life and vibrant health and joy. So growing up.
Beautiful. I want to get into all of that, but first I want to hear about you and how you got here.
Okay, and I'm going to summarize that first third of the book by simply saying a lot of you have heard of ACE, adverse childhood events, and the influence that those early years can have over the rest of our lives. Well, without ever understanding any of that, and I outline this in the book, I think I'm at a 7, and that I'll say
That's very
maybe,
high for people
yes.
who aren't familiar. I'm in grad school for counseling at the moment. So
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
very familiar with ACE.
And one could
Wow.
say, and I could say, just get over it, or reframe, or push on. And that is possible because what has happened throughout my life is that I just got by, but um, let's say, residual behaviors. That's what I'll describe my disordered eating. Residual behaviors. I began at 14, fearing food. I became anorexic, and then that led to bulimia because the threat was, you better start eating or we're going to hospitalize you, and the bulimia came in. That was at 15. I wasn't able to
Wow.
leave that behind until I was 67. I'm now 73, and it's been
Wow.
completely left behind. The miracle, I'll use that word, and it's so dramatic, is that I have lived these past 6 years without the threat of it returning. In other words, I'm not white knuckling some
Right.
kind of with an aversion to the past. No, it's just that I've changed enough in the way I feel and think and eat that it is gone. And that was so all those years of eating disorders, disordered eating, sort of owning my soul, even though I went on to be very successful in business. There was still shame. There was still physical abuse because you can't do what a bulimic does without causing some real bodily harm. So that's that. And then how did I get past that? 2 things. I read a book, Brain Over Binge, and this is in my book, so I will outline that. And I firmly believe that was a turning point, and that was in 2018, middle of 2018, that I read a book by Katherine Hansen, who, oh, hi, honey. Who's
This
that?
is my doggy guest. Her name is Reno. Yes.
Reno.
She likes to stick very, very close.
Hi,
She's very
beautiful.
sweet.
Is she
Yeah.
an Australian Shepherd or a mix of
I
that
think she's
kind?
like a blue heel something. Is that
I don't know, but she
breed?
looks
Yeah,
like a sweetheart.
she was a rescue. Yeah, I do a lot of dog sitting, and so she's
Yeah,
been with me several times before, and we've
that's
definitely
lovely.
gotten very close. Yes.
That's very
So
lovely. And
she's
she's
very interested in hearing what you have to say and hearing your story.
okay. All right. So, oh, where was I? Where did I leave off?
So you were saying that,
Hmm.
yeah,
Oh, so funny.
that was a long time of disordered eating.
Oh, yeah.
Like
Okay.
that's
So
a long
Katherine
time.
Hansen.
You discovered
Yeah.
brain over binge.
Yeah. Brain Over Binge, Katherine Hansen. She had read a book that was written by a man who found a way to help people recover from alcohol and drug abuse. With this method, she was struggling with, I think it was 7 to 10 years of bulimia, but hers was exercise, not purging and binging. And she applied it to her life and promised herself if she ever got through the hell of bulimia, she would help other people do the same. And his teachings led her to be able to leave it behind relatively quickly. Her teachings allowed me to change my eating and my attitude and my workings around food. And within a 3-month period, I was able to leave it behind. And the basic premise is that our mammalian brain, our limbic system, will go with the status quo. I knew that I wasn't always binging because I was depressed, because I had adverse childhood events, even though I didn't know what that was, because too many times I would have a binge that had nothing to do with any emotion other than, I've eaten too much, might as well just keep it going. Or I'm scared, or I'm bored, or I'm tense. That was my method. Well, her premise that proved out for me was that our limbic system simply got used to a certain behavior and that we could learn to ignore those urges. And that's what she called them, urges. And I did. I learned that, I know where that's coming from. I don't have to listen to it. And that was that urge to then binge. But the other part of that, and I'm compressing these thoughts. And so there may be questions, and yet I'm compressing it all just to get on with the story. And then the second part was, at that time, I began to be interested. I was just about to get my certification as a health and wellness coach, and I began to be interested in a whole food, plant-based dietary and lifestyle change. And when that happened, and I heard you say this, Chrissy, I heard you say this at the beginning of, in your introduction, at the beginning of your self-love series about your own situation with food. When I began eating whole food plant-based, without added sugar and without added oils, the caloric density of the food, or lack of caloric density. In other words, I could eat enough to be full, satisfied, and I say this all the time, and not fearful of starches, because I had gone through the Atkins thing. You don't eat carbohydrates. Anything that's a carbohydrate is going to cause a cascade of problems, including weight gain. Well, there was McDougall in there, Dr. McDougall, the late Dr. McDougall, and I began eating whole food plant-based without fear, but without the oil and without the sugar. I could eat enough, and what I was about to say is that belief that whole food carbohydrates, whole food starches are nature's appetite suppressant, antidepressant, because I'd been on a lifetime of the Paxils, the Zolofts, the Celexas, the SSRIs, thinking that's what I needed to get through all of this, and was able to go off anything and everything with the help of the balanced diet and the nutrition that helped feed my microbiome that wasn't really understood back then. But it was, because that's where the neurotransmitters, a lot of the neurotransmitters, they say 70 to 80% or more, are created in the microbiome in the colon. Anyway, that's what worked, those two together. And I give credit to and hold tightly my behaviors with a whole food plant-based diet because of the animals, because it keeps me balanced, and emotionally, mentally, physically, I'm better than I've ever been. And this is going on year after year. And my husband, thank goodness, came right over with me. He had a scare. He had a pituitary adenoma. That's a tumor on the pituitary. And as that grows, you can go blind. And of course, it can ruin your pituitary, which is rather serious. He had it removed. And the first 3 years, it started growing back. Well, the year we went plant-based, and he had heard that because plant-based nutrition helps, especially when IGF-1, the insulin-like growth factor, and other elements that come with eating meat and cellular proliferation. Once one went plant-based, usually it could affect the growth of a number of things, angiogenesis and the growth of cellular proliferation, as I said. And so he said, okay, well, I'll do that, because he was getting scared. If it grew any more, they were going to do radiation to his brain. He's an attorney, CPA, and that brain is all he's got as it relates to work. And no more growth. And so now it's been 4 years. He's checked every year with the CT scan. So he went in and he is determined. I am determined. And that's my history. That's my story with whole food, plant-based. And my mission as stated in Aging Powerfully, because I wrote this just a few months before, as a celebration before I turned 70, was to lay out there what I had learned, but to celebrate that at 70, especially because of lifestyle as medicine, at 70, I had decades more ahead of me, 10, 20, 30 years ahead of me. And there's no reason to think that can't happen based on the blue zones, knock on wood, no guarantees. And that was what I wrote that to honor. And my mission there, as stated, is to spend the rest of my life passing on that information, because I think others deserve it. I wish more listened, but they certainly deserve to know.
Right. That's such a fascinating story. And again, that's such a long time to live with that disordered eating. I mean, my heart just is kind of breaking for that person, because decades, I mean, I myself had my own struggles, as you mentioned, as you know, and it was into my 30s and 40s, before that really just receded and
there were so
shifted
many lost.
fundamentally.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
finish what you were saying. I'm
I
sorry.
was just going to ask, I mean, well, first of all, how did carrying that affect the rest of your life? And, was your husband aware that all of this was happening?
That's an interesting question. This is my second husband. I was married 40, and this is part of the book. I was married 40 years, and he died of esophageal cancer 13 years ago. And he was the only person that knew. When Aging Powerfully was published, and that was the end of 2020, my son who read it didn't know. All of my friends who had known me, some friends who had known me for 20, 30 years, one who knew me for 40 years, had no idea. So I didn't. Some people, when they have challenges, share it with others, and there's sometimes a helpfulness from that, but sometimes just additional complication. And I told nobody. Nobody knew. So how did it affect me? Well, I couldn't ever succeed or accomplish to the degree to feel pride and I'll say ownership, because I always carried the shame of knowing that what people saw wasn't what they were getting, because I looked, and I've always had a look of, because it was very carefully orchestrated, a look of being together and capable, and I spoke well, and I built a big sales company, and people admired me and wanted to be like me. They had no idea that when the going got tough, I was usually in a bathroom with my head in the toilet. Isn't that awful? And I don't talk a lot about it specifically because it gets ugly. I mean, when you're doing funny things with food, especially as it relates to bulimia, there's also a huge lie involved, a huge lie. If I were binging and not purging, that would have been evident. There would have been a sign that things weren't going well in my life, or at least I wasn't handling life in a way that, let's say, demonstrated control, that nobody knew because the signs weren't there. There were no signs at all. So yeah, it was it's hard to talk about because it was a shroud that I carried all those years. And some people, I just said this on I have a YouTube channel, YouTube Nan Simonsen, my name, and it's a culinary training, cooking demos, as well as health demos. And I said to them that I don't talk about it a lot because I fear that someone would think, someone desperate. I mean, look what people are doing. They're taking pills. They have to take the rest of their lives to lose weight because they don't feel they can do it any other way. I fear that if I plant a seed, they'll think, oh, I'll do that. And that's what happened to me when I was 15 and I was told you're going to eat no matter what. And they wanted me to eat a lot. My brother said, just throw it up. He was a weight builder, a muscle builder. And he taught me bulimia.
Wow.
He stopped. It didn't stay with him. I could never stop because it became that habitual way of me, so not just celebrating, but dealing with life. It just was. But in any case, I feared, and I have feared that painting that picture that you can eat all you want and then just dispose of it and life goes on beautifully. It was a hellish way to live. And I assiduously hold on to what will keep me from going back there. And I believe that having a diet that allows me to eat to satisfaction, maintain a steady weight without even thinking about it, no weighing or measuring, nothing like that, but being very healthy, about as healthy as a person can be, because this is one of the healthy, if it's whole food plant-based, not just vegan, because that can be a train wreck in terms of choices. That everything stays balanced, everything stays workable. And so I hold on to this because there is no appeal in that previous life. There was no joy in that. It was actually a punishment. It was in a way, a self-deprecation. Take this, take that, when you're really working to bring up something that won't come up. This is now really getting gnarly. So anyway, no, there's no good picture in that, meaning visual, mental visual, in that way of living, just because you can have more than most people have. The punishment of that lifestyle is not worth even imagining.
Wow. And again, I'm just astounded that you carried that for so long and just bore that burden for so long. And I don't have bulimia in my history. I have just plain old binge eating, and that itself was a full, I won't say a full-time job, but kind of a part-time job. So
Yeah,
that cost money though. That didn't
yeah,
make money. That made me
yeah,
spend a lot of money, but it was a horrible way to live. Horrible way to live. And for me, I don't know if you experienced this. It sounds like you were very functional and very successful in your exterior life. I was less able to hold it together, but for me it was a question of, on any given date, it was hard to plan because I never knew if I would be on or I would be off. If I would have just binged the night before and, been completely bloated, at risk of having a seizure, 10 pounds heavier on the scale than the day before due to water weight and inflammation and all of that good
yeah,
stuff. And so I just couldn't really plan. I didn't know what person I would be on any given day.
yeah.
And it sounds like you were almost pathologically functional, which in
Well,
some
it
ways
was,
makes it
yeah,
less, more difficult to recover because you're in some ways pulling it off.
yeah, yeah. I did pull it off, and I knew enough about nutrition to know um, how to nourish in between the binges to keep myself healthy. But I look back at my life and wonder what it could have been if I had back. Oh, now I just, if I had back that time, not to mention the money, tens, maybe hundreds of thousands through those years of money spent on food that I had no intention of being nourished on. Anyway, but the amount of time, what could I have accomplished in that amount of time if that time, because it could be hours, it could be days. You can eat your way through a day, especially if you're bulimic. You can eat and then anyway, you could go on for days and have it lost. I would have been a better mother if I hadn't been bulimic, because my need to be alone, to have time to do that, I would have been a better wife, because I would have been more engaged. Maybe I would have sat and played games with them. I'm not playing games because I'm off binging and I don't want people to know, you see. So, but yeah, I wonder what I could have and may have done if those hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours, maybe thousands of hours, could be recaptured. So yeah. So if, as they say, kids, don't try this at home. There's no glory in it. There's no escaping the requirement to make good decisions and follow through in a proper way, as opposed to taking a pill or just saying, I don't care and I'm going to go with my urges. Just don't do that. But then you get back to whole food plant-based, and those of us who are whole food plant-based and I'll say low oil, low sugar, because the sugar can be a bit, well, we have dopamine receptors in our stomach that light up our brain when we eat sugar that hits it like a bolus, refined sugars as opposed to things tied to fiber, and light up our brain. And the dopamine feels good for the moment, but dopamine's also a motivational neurotransmitter. It says, go back and get this. I mean, that was evolutionarily true. That was good. Go back and get more of it. It's a good thing. So in other words, we get hooked on sugars. And so I'm going to use the caveat, add the caveat, the avoiding the refined sugars, refined starches, just wrap it up and call it processed food, because those things, you could be whole food. No, you can't be whole food. You can be vegan, you can be on a healthy diet, but if that diet has a lot of refined foods, processed foods, labeled ultra healthy, lots of vegetables, like those chip bags that have beets and greens and all these things that are fried and seasoned and then poisoned with chemicals, the emulsifiers, the soy lecithin, that sounds so benign. Soy lecithin, it messes up our microbiome. If the microbiome's messed up, so are your neurotransmitters. See, now I'm going on a rant.
No, I'm totally with you. Yeah, anything with a label is suspect. Like you can kind of stop right there. And I remember a colleague of mine just recently, bemoaning soy, how there's soy in everything and it's so problematic. And I said, the problem isn't the soy. Soy is actually very health promoting. The problem is the processed part of it. It's not that there happens to be soy in this highly processed, concoction.
Yeah.
The soy isn't what's making it unhealthy. It's the rest of it.
Yeah. So what I was aiming for was that if indeed somebody practices a whole food plant-based diet, and those of us who do, to the person, including my husband, who just kind of fell into all of this, we wouldn't eat any other way. We say all the time when we eat one of our meals, unfortunately, we don't eat out a lot. There are a few places that we can go that are properly vegan, because a vegan restaurant's a very popular idea, but a lot of them aren't properly vegan because they use so much processed foods. a lot of oils, frying everything. And so that's not what we're talking about. So we eat at home a lot, but we eat a meal, and after our meal say, my gosh, that was so good. And the variety and the quantity and the beauty, and then the health that follows. No food
Right.
hangovers.
Right, right. It's a win-win. Like, why
Yes,
eat something unhealthy that tastes good when I can eat something that tastes good and is health promoting? Like,
yes.
it's just, it seems obvious once you get down the education and the healthy habits. But I'm still just thinking about, again, this secret that you were carrying for so long. It sounds very lonely. Um,
I had a friend. I still have a friend, and of all the people I knew, she was in my business, and so I saw her. I owned a Tupperware franchise. That meant the big Tupperware warehouse, and had thousands of salespeople and hundreds of managers that then trained the salespeople. And so I was in a place of respect, and I was with Tupperware for 30 years. But I saw her all the time in groups. She didn't drink. She didn't overeat. She This is the way I used to think of it. What you see is what you get. And she has, I didn't use that word then, but this is one of my favorite words now, equanimity. She had equanimity. She had grace. She was calm. Anyway, she was well contained, self contained, and confident. And I used to look at her, and she was my hero in that I believed, and I still believe to this day because I know her, I've known her now for 46 years, that she had no secrets. I, on the other hand, lived, I'll use this word, lived a lie. I'll be deprecating. I lived a lie. I had shame. I had behaviors that if other people saw would be repulsed. And yet I was the one in a room that people would admire. And that eats at your soul. And I now am that person who has no secrets. In other words, what they see, they get. They see how I eat. They see how I move because I exercise on a daily basis, and it's exercising for joy. You know, I began running at 70, and I did some 10Ks, did a half marathon, and then not on running, and not because of running, but I tore my meniscus, a multiple kind of a shreddy tear that I can't run on it. So I cycle. But there's joy in cycling through this wonderful natural plant park and along a river bottom. So I do that kind of exercise. My husband and I every night walk for a half an hour every night and have a chance to talk about the day. So everything that I do, I'm open about. I don't have. It's so refreshing. I was going to say I don't have that secret that, regardless of what somebody says, that's kind is then buffered by if you really knew me, you know? And I don't have that because they know me, because what they see is who I am now in all ways. And all of us have some little thing that we don't like. I don't know. We pick our nose or something, but I don't I don't know where that came from, but there's something. In other words, I'm making a
Sure,
point. We're
sure.
getting
Yeah.
gnarly here, so I might as well add gnarl. We do something that we wouldn't put out on display, but that's different than
Yes.
this is who I am. That is 100% falsehood. Yeah.
Right, right. And a lot of people never get there. I mean, you it sounds like you have some sadness, I have some sadness and regret about the time lost, but a lot of people never get there.
Huh.
So, you know, there's that reality. I'm just curious, how long have you been married to your current husband?
Uh,
Your
11 years.
I
Yeah,
won't say
met
current
him.
husband, your
Yeah,
husband.
yeah. Oh, I call him husband number two. I don't know what to call him because Well, my husband was dying and we knew he was terminal. He had gone through chemo radiation and went in to get the date for his resection surgery. They were, that wouldn't have been any fun either, but we thought that things could be at least attenuated and he would have years ahead. He was told, sorry, it's spread everywhere. You're terminal. How long? 4 to 6 months. And so we knew. And he was on home hospice. We refused any more of the terrible treatments. And he lasted 7 months, but we knew he was going to pass. And he said to me, because I met him at suicide attempt in January of my senior year in high school, and it was a serious one. It wasn't a cry for help. And met him a year later. No, I met him at 18 at the end of that year and married him at 19. And he was like my savior. He had 4 years older than me, had just come back from as a sergeant from Vietnam. So he was a tall, stalwart guy. And I was with him until I was almost 60, 59, and he died.
Wow.
I was terrified, and so was he, because he knew my secret. He also took care of, I'm rather debilitatingly dyslexic, and I have ADHD, didn't have it diagnosed. I knew there was something wrong with me. And that, you know what, all of this comes into play too. The stress of being different throughout all my years in school, being reprimanded through all my years without ever having any guess it could be a thing. I went back to get a certification in a college and I could get tested for free. A 3-day test that came back with a diagnosis that made me feel relieved because it wasn't just me. It was a reality, a tested reality that I had these things. In any case, so he had to do a lot of things for me. I couldn't do numbers. I'd never done a checkbook, balanced a checkbook. And he had rules about how we would live that would keep us financially comfortable and all of that. And he worried about me. So he wrote me a notebook. When I die, do these things. He wrote his own obituary. It was all very sweet. And yet everything, and he said, you've got to remarry, meaning go find yourself another knight in shining armor. And I never believed I would, because I loved him so much. I couldn't even imagine it. But about a year and a half into his being gone, I realized I loved having a partner, and I wanted another partner. Well, then I met Tim, my current husband. And so to answer your question, it's been 11 years. Yeah.
Wow. And so you were still struggling with the bulimia when you met Tim.
Well, this is interesting. When Bob, my late husband, was in his 7 months of, I'll make this quick, but it's an interesting part. When he was in his 7 months of recovery, the bulimia went away. Don't know how, don't know why. I even talked to Dr. Jen Hawk about this whole thing, how that could have happened, and how I could have, when I ultimately stopped, how I could have stopped, because I couldn't figure out how all this and why all this happened, and then how could I help others if I didn't understand myself. But it stopped, and the thought was his needs superseded. We were together the entire time. I was taking care of his needs, and anyway, it just did. And then it stopped. It was gone. And I met Tim and it was still gone. And then when he had his brain tumor thing, this is such a story, but it's true. The day he had his brain tumor surgery was the day, but years later, that my husband had died, the same date. And I saw it. I remember sitting in the waiting room, and I saw it as either an omen, oh no, Bob's going to get him, or Bob's going to protect him, because the coincidence of the same date, anyway, life and death with the second husband. And and it was a 7-hour surgery, but he survived it beautifully. And then but anyway, so that's just an interesting story. But the reason I even brought that up is that when I left, it was 7-hour surgery. When I left and he was in ICU, I stopped to go to a salad bar. I overate. I ate things I shouldn't, and the bulimia started again. I didn't have a eating plan that stopped it like I do now, but it started again, and off and on with Tim for a little while until 2018 when I stopped. I was still practicing that, which was even more, I'll say, devastating in terms of self-esteem, because I added to that a dreaded fear, or a dread and fear that Tim would find out, because Bob knew and accepted it. Tim would not have. He would never have understood. It would have been repulsive to him, and he'd have been gone. And so I feared that. And what a dreadful thing that would be, to be left because what I thought was so ugly really was ugly to another human being. You know what I'm saying? Isn't this all just something?
Wow.
I know, but he never knew. He never knew until he read my book. He said, "I didn't know you were doing that." Yeah. But so that's the story. And again, I am tethered to the precepts of lifestyle medicine, because if we live with our best health forward, using lifestyle, no phony baloney stuff like pills or procedures, but just what we are capable of doing to give our body what it needs. And the pillars are nutrition, and the College of Lifestyle Medicine defines that as whole food, plant-based. And movement. There are basic outlines of what that means, and I'll say what I say to my patients: at least 150 minutes a week, which is 20-30 minutes a day of movement. And then we can get more specific about resistance training and aerobic and all of that, but just something. And then community. We are tribal. We must have others in our life. It's just as important, because loneliness affects our adrenal system, affects our ability to even use the nutrients we eat, etc. And then rest, meaning sleep, prioritizing a good night's sleep, and then stress management. And that's where meditation comes in. I've adopted a daily meditation practice that makes such a difference, and mindfulness, and then avoiding addictive substances. And that's pretty important too, like cigarettes, alcohol, and in my old case, sugar, food, fatty foods and sugar. I was addicted to them, but I was also just addicted to that behavior.
Yeah. Wow. What a story. And again, I'm just so glad for your sake that you
Thank you.
emerged, intact and
Yeah.
victorious, and, sitting here now. I mean, I would never guess that you're in your 70s, never in a million years, but definitely you definitely earned your health and earned your place. So what was the book or the movie, or what led you to the whole food plant-based approach?
Oh, okay. That's another good one. Okay. I was a landscape designer. Well, my son calls my life now Mom 3.0. It was 30 years in Tupperware. And that worked well because I could use my skills as a dyslexic with ADHD. I could use my skills. I could turn my mind on a dime. That's very ADHD. I didn't have to fill out invoices because Bob did it for me because he knew I couldn't. Just funny business like that. Anyway, and then Mom 2.0 was a landscape designer. And I designed gardens for 15, well, actually, if I include my own garden before I went into it as a business, I created a a botanic garden on 2¼ acres, my own property, and we were in Sunset Magazine. We were on garden tours every year, so I knew, and I became a master gardener.
Wow.
And
Self-taught, or how did you
oh no,
learn
there
gardening?
was a program in the University of California that would train master gardeners for a year. We had to put in 50 hours of volunteer time and then the training, and we were designated master gardeners. And to maintain that, we had to put in volunteer time to help people garden. That was to proliferate.
Huh.
Stopped our call. No, okay. Anyway, so I became a master gardener. I got a certification in landscape design because I didn't know how to render a garden. I just knew how to put it in and choose plants. Well, I learned how to render, meaning design. And anyway, that was Mom 2.0. And then 3.0 is what I'm doing right now. But in
Wow.
yeah. So tell me your question again. That those
How
numbers
did
threw
you
me off.
find whole food
Oh,
plant-based?
okay. So I was always interested in botanic gardens, and I was at my son's house. He lives in a place called Palos Verdes Estates here in California, and or Southern California, not too far from me. And they had a class, and it was Dr. Pam Popper and um, her plant-based forum. She
Wellness Forum Health.
Wellness forum.
Yes.
She certified people to
Yes.
teach these classes on plant-based nutrition. After I took the class and went plant-based myself, I got that certification. I never did those classes, but I got that same certification because it was a way to learn more. But I took this 3-hour class plus lunch, and that did it. I went back home and I said to my
Wow.
husband, because it was the middle of that year I converted, I said to my husband, I think I found our way. This is what we're going to do. So that's how
And he was on board?
yeah, and that was because of his pituitary adenoma and his fear for the regrowth of it. And
Mm-hmm.
it's an N
Mm-hmm.
of 1 that the tumor hasn't regrown, but it regrew every year of our standard American diet and stopped growing the year we went plant-based, and it's been 4 years. And so I'll take that as
Yeah.
I can
It
call it
sounds
a
like
sign,
yeah.
or I can call it a sign, or I can call it proof.
Right. It sounds like there may be a connection there.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so when did you decide to take your interest, professional and
Oh,
become,
okay. At that
start a
time that
coaching?
I took that class, I was already I decided, because I was now in my late 60s, that designing gardens, being out in the sun, because I was always there watching the crews put in the gardens on those days, and then having to walk gardens in order to come up with my design plans and all of that. I was just getting too old to spend that much time in the sun and that much time walking up and down hills and things like that. And I decided that I wanted to do something else, and I figured, why not nutrition? So I went to the Institute of Integrative Nutrition and got my 1 year. It took a year of courses, and then I took another year of courses, the gut health and the hormone health and the master coach class. So in other words, I decided that nutrition should be my next step. That was the 3.0. And I looked around, and IIN was, or is now, the largest health coaching certification school in the world. And I thought, okay, I'll go with them. So that's how that happened. And I was about to I got my certification at the end of the year. And so we learn in that school, we learned options, but we were not told which direction to take. Everything, we were bio individuals and had to honor that, and therefore you just hear what's out there and pick. And that's the way they kind of did things, and I believe they still do. And that's where this course, At a Botanic Garden, again, there's that synchronicity, at the Botanic Garden was the thing that turned me around. I knew then where I was going.
Wow.
And I got the certification just a few months later. And oh, here's another, uh, I'll say synchronous event. I said to a friend, I'm going to go whole food plant based. And she said, well, why don't you go to the cooking class at my medical clinic? Didn't know anything about them, even though they're 3 minutes from here, because they teach plant based cooking. So I showed up at this cooking class. The chief, not operating officer, but the chief financial officer happened to be there at the class. And he said, are you a member? Anyway, are you a member of the clinic? No, I'm not. Well, how did you hear about us? I told him. And he said, well, we're glad you're here. And I said, well, I'm becoming a health coach and I'm going to be teaching whole food plant based. And he said, well, we need a health coach. So this was in October, November. I was getting my certification at the end of the year. He said, ours is retiring. She was the one that did that class. Ours is retiring. Would you come in for an interview with me and Dr. Dysinger? Well, again, Dr. Dysinger was one of the past presidents. So I'm under the wings of this giant who loved my book and was very glad I'm their health coach. And that's how the whole thing flowed. Isn't that amazing?
Amazing. Yeah. It really sounds like stars were aligning and something
Yeah,
was meant to
yeah,
be.
yeah.
So because that's the biggest challenge for a lot of health coaches is finding clients and finding business, making
Mm,
this sustainable. So to be connected with, a reputable
yeah,
institution of such caliber is really extraordinary.
yeah,
So you decided to write your book, Aging Powerfully, which we'll link to, of course, in the show notes. You decided to write that before you turned 70?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, here's where IIN, Institute of Integrative Nutrition, comes in again because they offered a class, Write Your Dream Book, and in
Oh,
July of 2019. And so I took the class, and my intention was to have it written before I turned 70, first part of January. And I said, is it possible that I could have it written and published by the end of the year? In other words, a 6 month period of time. And they said,
wow.
well, yeah, if you're determined. And then there was a contest at the end that the top three, I shouldn't even say top, that three of the authors who had published books, well, I guess the three they chose would get their tuition for free, and I was one of the
Oh,
three. So
oh,
I Yeah.
beautiful.
So I published on December 28th. I was one of the three, found that out just in time for my birthday. And the whole point, again, of getting this done in time was that instead of looking at 70 as the beginning of the end, because quite often, 70 is, most people will call 70 old age, any way you look at it. At 70, you're an older age. And most people decline. They start that declining pretty early, sometimes in the 50s and 60s. And I looked at 70 and thought, oh boy, the beginning of the black hole. And then I thought, that's when it dawned on me, no, you've got your blue zones. You have your whole food plant
Yes.
based. You have lifestyle as medicine. I've got decades ahead of me if that's what I choose. And that's why it was so important for me to celebrate 70 with this book, because then I could say to people, read my book, use those precepts of lifestyle as medicine. And
Hmm.
that's how the whole thing came together.
That's incredible. Well, as an author myself, I'm very impressed and envious that you wrote your book in under 6 months when mine took years, years, years.
Well,
Uh,
truth be told, they said you could do it and we'll show you how. And then they had, again, I don't do well with instruction, especially what they call word problems. Um, and they said, well, this is how you publish, and this is how you write your forward, and this is all those things. And that's when I thought, oh boy, I'm in trouble. Well, one of the speakers of the training classes they offered was a publisher. So I got her email address from IIN, wrote her name is Amy Olson, AMIE Olson, and I wrote her and asked if I wrote the book and I got editors, because I found several editors, would she publish it? Would she do that back end work? Because I still believe that I wouldn't have been able to manage that. It would have stressed me way too much. And she said yes. So with me writing the book and Amy doing that background thing, getting the numbers from the Library of Congress, all that stuff that I would have just been buried by, it got done in
Yeah.
6 months. So yeah,
Oh,
that
that's
was necessary.
incredible.
Yeah, that helped.
Right,
I
right.
can't wait to read your book. I've
Thank
heard you
you. Thank
describe it.
you.
It sounds wonderful.
Thank you. Well, with regard to your book, how was it to write that book? And is it a memoir? Is it a self-help book? What's the framework? What's the
It's
vision?
both. It's both.
Okay.
The first third is my early childhood, 2 suicide attempts, and this sounds dark, but it's not dark at all. I just state facts in a linear fashion with the notation at the end of a chapter. The impression from this particular situation in my life was I was never good enough, or the impression was don't gain weight, you'll be unlovable, and the impression was, and they were just statements. And even going through the death of my husband, they were just statements. So that was the background. That's about, maybe it's very short. It's only 175 pages, and so I think by page 50, that's all done. So I guess it's the first third of the book. And then I go into the lifestyle changes that, and it's almost a reference guide to those 10 lifestyle modalities that can make a difference. And I did a lot of research. The first 5 were from the College of Lifestyle Medicine. The others were from other research. For example, what is her name?
Right. So powerful is an acronym you had mentioned. What
Yes.
does powerful stand for?
P is plant-based. O is others. That's community. W is whole food plant-based. Purpose. P was purpose. And then others. Then W, whole food plant-based. E is exercise. R is resilience, which is sleep and stress management. F is fasting, because I do believe in time-restricted feeding, or water fasting, or some kind of period of letting our bodies digest without food input on a continual basis. U is living unafraid, living with enthusiasm, not fear, as we get older. L and L are love and laughter. All right, loving yourself. And you wrote an entire series on learning to love yourself and accept yourself and understand that we are enough. And then laughter, finding joy in life. And then Y is you, just celebrating the individuality that you are. So those are the 10.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah. I remember a long time ago, I came across a quote in a daily calendar, and the quote, and I don't know who said it, but it goes, "There are no precedents. You are the first you that ever was." And I saw that and I thought, yes, that
That's
makes sense.
marvelous.
That makes sense. Yeah.
I like very much, and I've only seen 3 of your in your series, but I liked very much the way you researched and the people that you interviewed and the way you expressed what self-love is and what it isn't. In other words, it's not narcissism, but it is fully accepting ourselves. I like it very much, what you've put into that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that feedback. Yes, it's a practice, and a habit and, an action rather than a feeling.
Yeah.
You've got such an interesting story. And again, my congratulations just on persevering and again, emerging victorious.
Thank you.
There's another saying that I relate to a lot, which is the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The
Yeah.
next best time is now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we've lost what time we had, but the next best time is right now. The only thing to do is to not waste any more time. And again, I don't believe that anything is really wasted, but it is interesting to think back and how much time could have been saved for me personally, like you, if I had discovered, the whole food plant-based approach
Hmm.
much sooner, and the pleasure trap and just that
Yeah.
whole conceptualization. Who knows, but we made it here, and it brought us to be sitting here right now talking to each other, and so that's a great place to be. So in that
Yeah.
respect, no complaints. But when you discovered whole food plant-based eating, did that in itself cure your urge to purge?
Uh, it took the fear of food away from me because
Okay.
now I was given a palette of possibilities. You can eat all these things. I believed and I fully accepted that whole food, plant based, low sugar, oil. I never worried too much about the salt, but at
Me too.
first,
I'm the
yeah,
same
yeah,
ilk.
at
Yes.
first, yeah, SOS free, and Chef AJ was an influence. Tammy of Nutmeg Notebook was an influence, and I immersed myself in that realm. Those teachers, Kathy Hester and Plentiful Kiki, and watched them, and I learned from them. Plus, I became a affiliate member of the College of Lifestyle Medicine, and they have a lot of training on what that really looks like. And I took T. Colin Campbell's course on plant-based nutrition, certified with that as well. So I understood what all of that meant, but I believed that palette, well, we'll go back to Dr. McDougall. I believed that I could have those foods and not fear them. And I found that to be true. Instead of weighing myself 2 and 3 times a day the way I used to, I could go long periods of time and not weigh myself and weigh myself again and realize, oh, I've either lost weight or stayed the same. In other words, this is really not, this is a safe way for me to eat because there was always terror in weight gain for me. There was a whole thing about that. And that became a non-issue. But I will say, more importantly, even if I had gained the health that I gained, the stamina, the ability to the stabilization of blood sugar, all of those things helped clear my mind, clear my head, calm my adrenals. All of that made a really, really big difference. And so the plant-based foods and my belief in what I was being taught came to fruition. And I still feel that way. And I understand that people don't want to change. But I said this in a recent podcast, I believe strongly that the effects of processed foods, not just the inflammation that is caused by the digestion of meats, the over intake of animal protein causing, again, inflammation, the 60 to 65%, we're hearing this now, of most of the American diet being processed and ultra processed food, in other words, not food,
Right.
has led to such dysbiosis, such a messed up microbiome, therefore the lack of short chain fatty acids and the things that are so necessary as proven by the microbiome project, all of this is scientific, that our society is living on foods that cause inflammation, chronic illness, and anxiety. And that it's possible that our society has become so reactive because people just aren't well. And we know they're not well because of the, again, fact that 70 to 75% of our population is overweight, 40% obese, and what that does, that it actually affects their bodies because fat cells, especially the visceral fat, is reactive. It's metabolically reactive, and so it causes its own problems. It's inflammatory. So in other words, people don't feel well. They just don't know it. They think that's who they are, what they are, and that those reactions are to be trusted as being real when maybe they're simply physiological. And so whole food plant-based, I have come to believe, because I didn't just do this, I studied it. I bike ride anywhere from a half an hour to an hour in the mornings. I'm never doing that without a podcast in my ear, listening to the neuroscientists and people like you, where we're talking about emotions, not just food. At first, though, first number of years, it was just about the science of whole food plant-based. And now I'm expanding to all of those things that are part of lifestyle.
Right.
So
yeah, I relate very much. I too have found it just a fascinating world, and something that's come up in many of the people that I've talked to on this podcast is how it's one of the unusual areas in that the deeper you go and the further down the rabbit hole you go, the more corroboration you find rather than the opposite,
Yeah,
So I just,
I
like you,
agree.
I feel such confidence and such security in this way of living and eating. And I'm really grateful because I know, like you've alluded to, very few people have that. It's normal to be fat and sick, as Dr. McDougall would have said.
I know.
And so, yeah.
And
Well,
maybe that's why it's so hard to pull people away from their lifestyle. They're used to the fat and the sick. They don't like to feel that short-term discomfort of the detoxing, that the detoxing away from the sugar. I was with a group last night, and it was for a 4th of July party. We were all together, and it was, the host had ribs, and these are dear friends of ours, and so I bring baked beans, and they're beans I make from scratch and then make into a baked bean that would go with ribs. And that way my husband and I have something to eat. They're delicious, and it's whole food plant-based completely. But there were 10 other dishes that were brought by people, and the food was heavily mayonnaised, or in other words, everybody was bringing something wonderful, but there were only a few of the things that we would have eaten. Now, one of the conversations at the table was, gosh, I hope this doesn't get out. Well, it's going to get out. But one of the people was had been a vegan for 2 years, inspired by one of his nieces, who had gone vegan, and he was for 2 years, and he travels, and he's a businessman, has a company, and goes internationally. And he said it just became too hard. And then he waxed poetic about, and that's when he really got a lot of input from the table, about the foods that he can now eat, how he can travel and have all these amazing foods at all of these places with all of these chefs, and that they're so flavorful, and it's not as hard to find what he wants and all of that. Those things were all true, but I couldn't help, and I didn't say it because it's hard enough to be socially integrated when we feel this strongly, because if we say too much, we're just not invited back. and most people know what I think and feel, but I didn't say to him, what are your numbers like now? And I this is the part I don't want to sound mean, but he did look heavier. He did look more puffy. I've known him for years and years. And maybe he just liked it like that because he's now, years older. But maybe it's because of the effect of the food that is so constant in in so normal. Okay. Ocean Robbins said this. He said, processed food is advertised, subsidized, and normalized. But so is being overweight. Everything, all of the ads now for medications include rather overweight people because they're normalizing what isn't healthy because it's politically correct. Cancel culture actually backs that up. And I get all of that, but we're getting sicker by the day, and all of that is accepted and normalized. So I watched this play out last night. I watched it play out where there was such enthusiasm with being able to eat whatever you want, when you want, in any way anybody makes it. And I can't help but look at foods and think, why are you putting that in your body? And so I look at, like a potato salad that's 3/4 mayo, things like that. And it's not being judgmental, it's being discerning. So it's kind of an interesting challenge because it's hard to get people to walk away from that. And I'd watched, and last night somebody had walked away and gone right back because it was easier. And yet you and I know, and hopefully you here listening are at a place where you know that this is better. This is far better. I'll take this. I'll take my baked beans, the fresh fruit skewers. Let's see, the hummus, where I had to kind of scoop away the olive oil, which isn't hideous, but it was still there because it's a very popular thing too. But I'll take that plate over eating the stuff that I don't even realize will make me feel really crummy the next day without even identifying that had something to do with it.
100%. I am so with you, of course. And that was a big part of the motivation for starting this podcast, is just so people realize that they're not alone. There are other people all over the world who are committed to this way of eating and living and believe in it and value it. And, I personally feel very lucky to have found it. Yes, it makes for plenty of awkward moments and plenty of social discomfort and just incidents of feeling not connected and biting my tongue about what people are saying about food and ignoring the animal piece of it. We haven't even talked about animals during this conversation, but obviously they're the one bearing the brunt of this horrible, standard American diet that we've got. But all we can do is, be those powers of example and just value it ourselves and live our lives as best we can, which I can tell you're doing at 70 plus. So thank you so much for that. The final question I have for you, Nan, I know you tend to use the term whole food plant-based rather than vegan, but this, of course, is the Vegan Posse. So is there a single word that for you sums up what being vegan is all about?
Compassion. Compassion. I rant when I see, and we see it daily, hourly, minute to minute, the compassion that is given to animals that are saved in individual acts. The mother duck who's allowed to cross the road with her darling little babies, and the Bambi that's playing with the homeowner's dog, and oh, isn't that sweet? And those acts of compassion are beautiful, but there is such a disconnect between the compassion for the individual acts and the reality that those same animals, any animal, is tortured to die so that we could put it on our plate. That's so the word compassion in a positive way and maybe a slightly unrealistic, disjointed way.
Right. A challenge. Like
Yes.
you say you care about compassion. So
That's what
live up.
I'll start thumping
Yes.
the desk. But what about da da da?
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
if we
Yeah.
could
Well, thank
just
you.
see the well, you said that in one of your videos. If somebody would watch, and you gave two videos that I wasn't familiar with.
Meet your meat and dairy is scary.
I don't know those.
Yeah, Meet Your Meat is a very well-known video that PETA produced.
Oh, okay.
So it's kind of a classic. And I really love the Dairy is Scary video. In
Okay.
fact, I plan to reach out to the girl who made the Dairy is Scary video, and she's made a lot of other videos, but she's just, you know, just like a very appealing personality and presence, but she just lays it all out there in a very concise, 5 minutes. So yeah, definitely
Okay.
recommend
All right. So I
those.
don't know if that's what you were looking for, but I'll use that word compassion again.
That's perfect. Yes, that's perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Congratulations on your book.
Thank
I
you.
love the concept of aging powerfully especially because we often hear about aging gracefully, and that's fine. But to me, it indicates sort of a passiveness, just like, oh, just have a good attitude about it and just, take what comes to you. And powerfully, yeah, like let's get to take some action and have some agency and self-efficacy in our own lives, which is fantastic. So again, thank you for modeling that for people in a way that I'm sure so many people can resonate with.
Thank you.
And we close every episode by taking 30 seconds of silence for all the suffering animals, human and non human, who desire, as we all do, safety, happiness, and the freedom to live out their lives without interference. So, Nan, I invite you to join me in 30 seconds of silence for the animals, and we'll conclude with the sound of the bell. Thank you, Nan, and thank you, Posse. See you next time. Until then, stay strong and stay true.
Thank you, Chrissy.
Thank you. All right.
It was got a lot deeper than I get